The biological approach. So you need to be aware about the basic assumptions of this approach, the influence of genes, biological structures and neurochemistry on human behaviour, genotype and phenotype, the genetic basis of behaviour, and evolution and behaviour. So quite a lot of AO1 stuff there, but we'll go into a bit more detail about each of these. So the key assumptions is that all of human behaviour can be explained through biology. So everything that is psychological first began as being biological. Therefore, we need to look at the processes within the human body, so genes, neurochemistry, brain structure. An understanding of these can help explain human thought processes and human behaviour. So the influences of genes, biological structures and neurochemistry on behaviour. So genes are inherited from one generation to the next, and they carry instructions or particular characteristics such as intelligence, height, hair colour, eye colour, as well as certain behavioural characteristics and traits. So when we looked at OCD, we talked about the idea of the SERT gene being implicated in that, and in aggression the MAOA gene is linked to the development of aggression. Biological structures play an important role in behaviour. So the nervous system carries messages from one part of the body to the other via neurons, and lots of human behaviour are controlled by neurons, so breathing, eating and sexual behaviour. Neurotransmitters or neurochemistry are chemicals that transmit signals and information, and they can affect behaviour. So they trigger a nerve impulse and in the receiving neuron and stimulates the brain into action, then that's an excitatory neuron. If they inhibit a nerve impulse, so stop a nerve impulse and mean that it's less likely to fire, then they are inhibitory. Now, key neurotransmitters that have been linked to the development of certain characteristics or behaviours is low levels of serotonin linked to OCD and high levels of dopamine linked to schizophrenia. Genotype and phenotype. So genotype is the genetic code, the genetic makeup of an individual, so written within the DNA or individual cells. The phenotype is the way that the genes are expressed through physical, behavioural and psychological characteristics. So for example, the PKU is a genetic disorder that can be prevented by using a restrictive diet. So it's a genetic disorder, so that's the genotype, but through interaction with the environment, the restrictive diet, the phenotype takes place, so it can be controlled and prevented from happening. So that demonstrates that some behaviour is an interaction of nature and nurture and isn't simply the result of nature or nurture. Evolution. So that's any behaviour or trait that has increased the chances of survival and therefore later reproductive success will be passed on to future generations. So genes are adaptive because they give the possessor of those genes and the offspring certain advantages, so increased survival rates and increased reproductive success. And it's through the process of natural selection and successive generations they develop those behaviour and they get passed on even more so, and they might even become exaggerated over time. For example, behaviours in newborns is described as adaptive by Bowlby because it promotes survival. So attachment is adaptive because it enhances survival of offspring. So if we were to look at this form marker, Rita and Holly are identified as twins who were separated at birth. When they finally meet each other at the age of 35, they were surprised at how different their personalities were. Rita is much more social and outgoing than Holly. Use your knowledge of genotype and phenotype to explain the difference in their personalities. Now, because they are identical twins, they are monozygotic, they share 100% of their genetic makeup, so therefore their genotype is identical as well. So their genotype for certain characteristics will be the same. However, it is their interaction with the environment that has resulted in them having different personalities. So Rita when she was younger, could have been encouraged to be more sociable, being more friendly, maybe did partake in a lot more extracurricular activities than Holly did when she was younger. Therefore, their genotype has been interacted with the environment, and therefore is expressed in their phenotypes of their different personalities. So in terms of evaluation then, so Scout, conflicting evidence, so we cannot separate nature and nurture. Identical twins and non-identical twins and family studies all have genetic similarities, so just because there seems to be a trend that it is inherited or it runs in the family, it could be actually down to nurture, because they share the same environments as well. In particular, the higher concordance rates in identical twins could be down to the fact that they are treated more similarly than non-identical twins because they look the same. Other explanations that we need to take into account for it's biologically reductionist, so it breaks down a very complex human behaviour down to the smallest components. So it breaks down, for example, schizophrenia down to genes, neurotransmitters or hormones. So when we talked about the idea that schizophrenia was a result of high levels of dopamine, so that's breaking that very complex behaviour down to a single neurotransmitter. Whereas an interactionist approach might be more appropriate. So when we talked about schizophrenia, the diathesis stress model, that actually it's a combination with environmental factors. So it could be that it is family dysfunction and the double bind theory that explains schizophrenia, rather than this approach being biologically reductionist. It is useful, so it has practical and useful applications. So research into the role of neurochemical imbalances in depression and OCD has led to the development of drug treatment. So for OCD, we said it was low levels of serotonin, so therefore treatment based on increasing levels of serotonin, so SSRIs, have been found to be effective. So therefore it has useful and practical real-world applications. Testable, it is very scientific. It uses measures that are largely objective, such as brain scanning techniques and biochemical levels, so therefore we can replicate research studies under the same conditions. So increases reliability and is very scientific in its viewpoint. If we were to look at a 16 marker, you might get discuss, biological approach. Remember, discuss is your AA1 and AA3, so outline and evaluate, and almost you have too much AA1, so you have to be quite succinct in the AA1 that you are talking about, and remember that it's only worth a third of the mark, so you should be spending more time on your AA3 than your AA1.